Good morning, or should I say good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jeff Kittner with the North Dallas Chamber, and we are pleased today to present James McGuire from the City of Dallas, who will be giving us an update on the environmental plan for the city. And this is very timely because James, as I'm sure he'll tell us, was briefing the City Council on this just yesterday. And so we look forward to learning more from him about the environmental plan. And we are pleased to present this program with the Oak Cliff Chamber of Commerce. So thank you, Keandra, and your team for helping us promote this. We always enjoy collaborating with you and the other chambers around the city. So thank you for your partnership. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason Bloom. Jason is a partner with Haynes and Boone, and Jason is one of our board members. And I'm going to let Jason make the introductions and kick the program off.
Okay, thank you, Jeff, and good to see everybody via video. I want to welcome everybody to the leadership briefing today, which is sponsored by Haynes and Boone, the Dallas Area Rapid Transit. I don't know if Nevin Grinnell is on, but thanks to him and his organization, and then Southwest Airlines with former board chair Beth Harbin. I don't know if she's on or not. The leadership briefings that we have on about a monthly basis strive to bring our business and community leaders together with our chamber members to learn about issues of importance to the community. And we have that opportunity today, of course, with James McGuire, who serves as the Director of the Office of Environmental Quality and Sustainability for the City of Dallas. In that role, Mr. McGuire brings significant experience in regulatory compliance, enforcement, permitting, emergency response, resilience and sustainability planning, and all other aspects of the office's activities. James lives in East Dallas and has two young children, Carter and Sage, that are budding environmentalists. Prior to joining the Office of Environmental Quality and Sustainability, James had over a decade of practice as an environmental attorney at a Texas leading law firm and at the City of Dallas. He obtained an MS in Geological Sciences from the University of Texas at Austin's Jackson School of Geosciences. And like other professionals in his office, he uses technical and regulatory experience as a basis for ensuring that Dallas is an environmental leader. We will try to reserve some time for questions at the end. And with that, I turn it over to Mr. James McGuire.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I had no clue they were going to make you read that whole thing, so I apologize in advance for the choppiness of the intro. Yeah, my name is James McGuire, again, Director of Environmental Quality and Sustainability here at the City of Dallas. And we're really happy to be here with you today. I know we've tried to have this scheduled probably for the last 2 or 3 months, and with all sorts of things popping up and getting in the way, I'm really happy that we're able to do this remotely, and hopefully with some presentation from Sue Alvarez here shortly as well. Before I jump into what's actually going on with the CCAP, and there's a bunch of good news. We just presented it in its entirety to our Environment Sustainability Committee yesterday morning. It passed unanimously, and it'll go towards a full council vote on May 27th. I wanted to set the stage a little bit for you about what we're doing and what's going on with respect to environmental planning here at the City of Dallas. So we've probably been looking at this issue seriously for environmental planning, mitigating environmental risk, looking at potential far-off impacts of climate risk for a good couple of years now, and really wrapping our heads around what it is we can do, what it is we can't do, what the limitations are for municipality in Texas, and where the opportunities are to really collaborate with our business sector, collaborate with our philanthropic sector, and all the leaders in Dallas that have been working on these issues for a long time. We know we have a bunch of companies that have very robust CSR policies and CSR groups. They've been coming up with climate strategies and environmental strategies for a number of years. There's no reason for the city to reinvent the wheel with respect to that. And there's also science economics and market principles at play that we can take advantage of here in Texas, and that have been being taken advantage of as we see our renewable portfolio continuing to grow statewide, while we're still able to maintain a grid that's providing reliable electricity and reliable energy to all of our residents and our businesses. So we started off basically with a council resolution about a year and a half ago when our city council said, Office of Environmental Quality and Sustainability, we want you to create a comprehensive plan that addresses the environment and also addresses climate. And we want you to do so in a way that is both effective and equitable. And those were the two operative terms. It needs to be effective, it's got to work, and it's got to be equitable and treat the folks across Dallas in a way that promotes equity and promotes diversity and inclusion. So we knew we had an uphill battle because we are in Dallas. This is something very new to do. I think probably even amongst this call, we might have several dozen interpretations of what an equitable climate plan looks like, an equitable environmental plan. Even what diversity, equity, and inclusion mean is subject to interpretation. So from a staff standpoint, we knew that we needed to have a process that was completely defensible, a process that brought everybody together to discuss things that we knew there was not going to be complete agreement on, and come up with a workable consensus. A workable consensus that would be developed around a table that included folks from environmental justice communities, business leaders, academics and public health officials, so that we could come up with a strategy that again, is workable, and it's also something that is not just Dallas, something that can be, have strategies that can have some reverberation across the Metroplex, and make sure that they're effective. Things that can be adopted across the 8 or 9 million people that live here, not just portions of the 1.3 million that are in Dallas. So we got to work. We hired AECOM, which is an international leader in creating these types of plans. They have engineers, planners, policy experts, modelers that have been working on this for a number of years. We brought our own expertise and our own ability to do community engagement and conducted hundreds of meetings over the last few years about what does a comprehensive environmental and climate action plan for Dallas look like? What should the goals be? What are the possible feasible actions that are actually within the realm of being implemented, and the things that made sense? And we developed that through community surveys, business surveys, in-person meetings, online forums where we let anybody and everybody post their viewpoints. We got information consistently to all of our council members, the last mayor, the current mayor, and the result has been really striking. We've had sort of an unprecedented amount of engagement across the not just the environmental advocacy sector, but everybody, talking about solutions, talking about making Dallas a better, healthier community with a higher quality of life, and getting down to the nitty gritty too. As a city official, you know, one of your main concerns is, what are our far off risks that maybe don't seem today to be tangible, but we know they're likely to occur? And I think at a time right now when we're responding to a pandemic, we knew that was a possibility a year or two ago, but we probably wished that we had paid a little bit more attention to it and planned a little bit better, because now it's upon us. And although we're doing our yeoman's job reacting to it and making sure that the impacts are being mitigated as much as possible, there's always that opportunity for better planning at the front end. So in a lot of regards, environment and climate risk is like that. We know some of the risks are seemingly far off. You know, the Dallas Fed, of course, put out a study over last summer where a macroeconomic study of the impacts to our GDP and under circumstances where we have effective plans and we don't have effective plans. And there's about a 10% delta between business as usual approach without effective planning and a strategy like Dallas has undertaken with effective planning. So you're seeing basically a 10% delta between that business as usual strategy and that effective planning strategy that would benefit Dallasites, benefit our business community, and help make there be a little more continuity. To get even more granular and nitty gritty, all 4 of our municipal bond rating agencies have stepped forward and said, you know what, we're going to be looking to see what some of you larger cities are doing to mitigate your climate and your environmental risk. We want to see plans in place that have a framework for you to look at these things and work on your flood risk, work on your extreme heat risk, the things that can impact business continuity, and already are in places like Phoenix, where the airports have had to shut down on certain days when it just got too hot for planes to take off. Those are the sorts of risks that we're looking at in Dallas too, in the not too distant future. So responding to what our bond rating agencies want to see us to as well was also part of that very granular challenge. So the back end, of course, would be making sure that once we have a plan like this developed and we start going and marching towards what these actions are going to look like, that we continue to integrate the business community into it, that it's something that approaches from the standpoint of carrots before we get to sticks. And when you say carrots, we talk about first, developing incentive schemes, developing ways where the market can act, and cheaper solutions that potentially have less impact on the environment or less emissions can be adopted by the community at wide, and also doing so in a way that's equitable. So we're not just, for example, promoting energy efficiency in our CBD when there are folks living in Dallas suffering from energy policy that could really benefit from that marginal increase in their income if they had also had those energy efficiency efforts in their homes. So I think that's part of what a true definition of what an equitable plan can look like, an equitable CCAP can look like. And that's the approach that we've taken. And going forward through implementation, we expect to be hand in hand with our business leaders and our business communities. As I mentioned yesterday to our council, we were very fortunate to be chosen one of 3 international cities in the first cohort of the City Business Climate Alliance. And that will basically be 2 or 3 years of in-kind support for Dallas, looking at what's worked around the world, what's best practices and science-driven, really digging into feasibility and costing studies so that we understand that the actions that we actually implement, the details of those are not things that set our business community off or the least fortunate members of our community off. So that's sort of the underlying philosophy behind our approach and how CCAP can really help provide benefits across all Dallasites. And I want to hand it over to Assistant Director Susan Alvarez to really present some of the aspects to the plan to y'all as well. And Sue, I hope I didn't trample too much on your presentation regarding the substance of the plan. But I also want to point out to you too. So your background as an engineer working in flood risk, working in stormwater quality. I come from a brownfields redevelopment background, initially working with large multifamily developers across the nation, really coming at it from a pragmatic standpoint, but also with these very large goals and looking towards innovation, looking towards ways to create a better quality of life and save people money at the same time. So that's our philosophy, and I'm going to hand it over to Sue right now.
Thanks, James. You are going to make it very easy for me to skim through some of my getting an abbreviated, hot off the presses presentation from what we presented to the City Council Committee yesterday. It is relatively high level in respect for your time. Otherwise, we'd probably be here all afternoon talking about different actions and things. So I'm going to kind of zip through some things and then leave a little bit of time in case you've got questions. So with that, very quick, and James already touched on some of these, we're going to look at why we're even looking at climate planning, what we did, the plan that we came up with, we think does a good job of fitting Dallas, and then the outcome that we anticipate from implementing this plan. So our overall vision is for Dallas to be a leader in reducing emissions and addressing climate and environmental risk with effective, equitable, and common sense solutions. And as James said, we're largely relating or focusing around a data-driven approach. So it's not pie in the sky, this would be wonderful. It's work. Is it something that we can do within our governmental authority? Are there other ways to do some of these things? Mayor Rawlings, back in 2017, signed the U.S. Climate Mayor's Pledge to do climate planning in Dallas. Immediately upon taking the oath of office, Mayor Johnson re-upped our commitment to the U.S. climate mayors and has also set forth a mission for us to take forward as we're looking at this climate planning effort. And what we've done is consistent with both the vision and Mayor Johnson's mission for us. So overall, the process was very, very heavily informed by public input, both by stakeholders and our community. One of the basics, this comes from the 4th National Climate Assessment. These are from Chapter 23, which is the North Plains. And this is what we're looking at. We're looking at more days of extreme heat, 5-degree temperature increase. Doesn't sound like much, but that's average over a day. And we're looking at 1 to 2 more months of 100-degree plus days by 2100. We've already seen some pretty crazy periods where we go from extreme drought to extreme flooding. 2015 comes to mind. And Dallas remains in non-attainment for air quality. So we have some existing environmental challenges. One of the other things is Texas leads the country in billion-dollar-plus weather and climate disasters. This is the data from 1980 through 2019. And we lead the country in all 8 categories that the Weather Service tracks. The other thing is this is cut off a little bit on the right-hand side, but you can see a general trend in the amount of money that we're spending on disaster events from 1980 to 2019. That nice big fat green is severe storms like we've had recently. When I first joined the department, about a week in, we got a panicked call from our controller, who had been called by Moody's, who writes our bond ratings. And Moody's wanted to know not if we were doing anything for climate, but what we were doing. And the person in the controller's office is like, can I just tell them we're not doing any of this green stuff? And I'm like, no, let's give me a week. And we started making phone calls, and we realized very quickly that a lot of the different city departments, mainly for efficiency standpoint, had already implemented a lot of things that will help us maybe moving forward along the lines of climate mitigation. So as you can see from this graph, we came in behind New York and San Francisco, which is a pretty good place to be. It's a little bit over $3 billion. I will tell you most of that is related to water supply and flood control measures. One of the other things that came out, and the folks at the North Central Council of Governments gave this to me, is a National Institute of Building Sciences study looking at savings related to money spent to make your community more resilient and to flood-proof your community. And so there's a very good return on investment in that infrastructure expenditure, basically to kind of future-proof ourselves. One of the other things James mentioned is that the Federal Reserve Bank in Dallas has also been looking at macroeconomics. They did a very nice paper that is written by 400 PhD economists, which I am not. But basically, the green line on the bottom is business as usual, and it's showing a drop in the GDP. The yellow line along the top is if we do implement appropriate measures within our communities. So one of the first steps in doing a climate plan is to do a greenhouse gas emissions, figure out where things are coming from so that you can align your plan to address it. So we did that based on 2015 data. The top 4 areas in Dallas for greenhouse gas emissions are buildings and energy, transportation, industry, and then solid waste and water treatment. The reason solid waste and water treatment are so low is that both processes involve pulling off gas and reusing those for power, so it doesn't go into the overall equation. As James mentioned, we are looking at an equitable approach. We understand, and actually the recent pandemic has illustrated in really vivid detail that when things happen, not everyone is affected equally. And so that was taken into account when we were doing our community engagement. We wanted to reach people that are not normally focused on city processes. And we also know that as we move forward towards implementation, that's where we need to start on some of these measures. So what we did is took a look at a bunch of our plans. Most climate plans across the country focus on adaptation, which is managing the risk of climate change. It gets into disaster management, flood protection, infrastructure. They also look at mitigating those things that are causing emissions, things like energy, transportation. And on the energy side, it's both the use and the development of energy. As we looked at some of the plans across the city, we also realized that to effectively address both mitigation and adaptation, there's a piece in there with environmental quality that is critically important to our other goals. And so we've got these three things, or three larger areas where we've got actions identified. In the middle is that environmental justice piece, as it should be, so that if we're implementing our plan correctly, the folks that need the help the most are the first to see that effort. So as James said, we had a very robust group of stakeholders. We also had an internal task force of departments that have ongoing plans. This is just a smattering of some of the folks that were involved in the development of the plan. And this is kind of a timeline. We, in the world of climate planning, this one went on a pretty quick trajectory. We realized during the summer of 2018 that most cities take 1 to 2 years to develop a plan. And if we were going to have a plan in place by 2020, which is one of the requirements of the climate mayors, that we had to get busy. And so we started a little bit over a year ago in February, convened 2 sets of 6 formal meetings, and then just about anybody that would call us, be it an Oak Cliff Chamber or North Dallas Chamber or the funky East Dallas Democrats or the Eco-Socialists, we met with anyone that asked. And we had some great, robust conversations. And we really got a pretty wide range of suggestions to look at. So from that, Far, do you want to tackle some of this? Okay, I will keep diving then. So
we don't mind, but we don't have any of the slides, Sue. So
okay.
If you could tell us what slide we're on, we could jump. Sue could jump up.
We're on the projections and targets slide, which is the wedge. So what we did is we took all the actions that we pulled into the plan and put them into a model just to see how close it would get us to meeting our forecasted reductions of emissions. And so the purple is related to fuel switching. Transportation is the red. Electricity and green is the, is the yellow. And the orange is waste diversion and treatment changes. And again, because we're pulling greenhouse gases off of both the landfill and our treatment processes, that's pretty slim. We then projected forward, and you can't really see because you see people's pictures instead. While we have a good start, we are pretty well below our targets moving forward. I was looking at Houston's plan today. They covered that by purchasing credits, which is a way to go, but I don't know if that's really getting us where we need to be. So through our poor consultants, we give them 20 existing plans that we found when we were responding to Moody's. They identified 400 actions. They then took what we were already doing and looked at what other cities, both in Texas and across the country, were doing, and came up with another several hundred actions. We used input from both our stakeholders and our community to kind of hone that down into a final 97 actions within 8 major categories. And we looked across Is it mitigation? Is it adaptation? Does it provide environmental benefits? Does it address environmental justice in Dallas? The other thing that we did that I think is a little bit different about Dallas plan compared to some of the other plans is that we screened. We looked at, is this like really expensive? Is it something that Dallas can even do from a legal standpoint? Is it going to get us where we need to go? Does this make sense? Is it something that our local businesses might do? Is it something our neighborhoods might do? And so we screen through those things, and we screen through public acceptance. So within each area, because the council very clearly said, we want a measurable plan, we don't want a pretty plan sitting on the shelf, we came up with targets, both for 2030 and for 2050, in each one of the focus areas identified. So I'm going to run through our 8 areas, but I'm just going to do kind of a high level. Dallas buildings are actually the greatest share of emissions in our emissions inventory. And so that becomes a pretty easy low-hanging fruit to increase the efficiency of our existing buildings, to ensure that new buildings coming online are also sustainably constructed. And then through our adventures with the tornadoes and with some of the straight line storms we had last summer, we realized that we really need to look at climate resilience for both city and other structures, so that when these events happen, people have a place to go. Our next goal is renewable energy. Again, we want to maintain a high level of reliability during extreme weather events. We are encouraging investment in and greater use of renewable energy. And we want to ensure affordable access to renewable energy. We have 11 actions under this category to address 30% of our emissions. The third one, and this is the category where we probably got the most input from the public next to the waste sector, is transportation. We're coordinating the goals in this with our friends in the transportation department as they look at the strategic mobility plan. We're also working with the folks in our planning and urban design group that are getting ready to update the Forward Dallas, otherwise known as the comprehensive land plan. So we want to shift transportation so that we're moving people and stuff in fuel efficient vehicles. We want to reduce the trips where people are traveling by themselves. And this third bullet down is really probably the trickiest one, but it's to really look at where our jobs and housing are compared to transportation infrastructure. And it may involve re-looking at how we do development and redevelopment moving forward in Dallas. This gets into transit-oriented design and some of the things in that. The other thing is that we want to look at alternative forms of transportation. In addition to transit, things like walking, biking, scooters, etc. So we have this sector actually has the most actions. I will say that we've also been coordinating this sector with our friends with DART. They're re-looking at their bus schedule. They're doing a bunch of capital planning as well. Waste, we got a lot of comments here too. We had very strong public concern and interest in expanding recycling, which we're currently doing through the multifamily recycling ordinance. We got a lot of interest in looking at expanding composting and looking at trying to split our current bulky and fresh and bulky items. It's kind of a mouthful, and doing that a little bit quicker than is in our current plan. The other thing is we're currently generating energy from the organics that go in the landfill. I think we want to continue to do that because it helps preserve landfill space. The photo on the right, many of you will recognize as Loop 12 in 2015. When we had some major flooding, we entered into that major flooding coming out of a major drought. Most of The hydrologists in this area, most of the emergency managers, have never seen us go from a level 3 water restrictions to uncontrolled overflow on our reservoirs in the river in the period of a month, which is what happened. And that's the variation between flood and drought that you hear the experts talk about that we'll see more often. So a lot of the goals in the water section come from Dallas Water Utilities. They have been leading in water resources planning since there was an even worse drought in the 1950s. And so they have taken a very proactive role in conserving and protecting water resources. They're doing an update to some of their flood plans. And they actually are a cutting edge water system. So we've got 15 actions in this sector that we've pulled primarily out of their existing plans. Last but not least on the right, well, not quite last, one of the things that we found is that related to heat island impacts that James mentioned, related to air quality, related to just basic quality of life, we need to update and expand our green space across the city. We have the Trinity Forest, we've got the Elm Fork, we have some good green spaces, but it's in spots. And there's a large portion of our population that lives a lot farther than a half a mile, let alone a tenth of a mile or 10 minutes from a park. The Deck Park on the right is a really good example of adding more green to an urban environment. And we're hoping through this plan to kind of focus on more of that. So we're heavily looking at nature-based solutions, mainly because of the climate adaptation. We can affect air quality, we can affect the hydrologic response, and it makes Dallas a cleaner, greener, cooler place to live. So we've got 9 related actions under this sector. One of the other things that the pandemic, when we first started down this journey, we got a lot of feedback from the community, mostly related to finding food and addressing food deserts. And so we've got 14 actions along 5 different objectives related to urban agriculture and getting healthy local food. When I first came on board, there was an issue with the farmers market, and they didn't want other farmers markets, and we couldn't figure out what was driving it. When we went and talked to them, we found out that all of the local farmers markets were getting their food from the same suppliers, and there simply wasn't a very good, robust local supply. With the recent pandemic, we've come to realize it's not just an issue of the food deserts in Dallas. We have some potential food supply chain challenges that we also need to take a look at. So we have 14 different actions there, basically to address our food system. This is one of the few areas where I included the Why It Matters slide that we provided to council. This shows some of the existing low-income areas where there are food deserts. Additionally, most of Dallas food comes from either south of the border or California. It comes from well over 2,500 miles. And so if we have transportation and infrastructure issues related to climate change, we're going to struggle with having basic food supply. So that's something where we're trying to expand the amount of food that is grown here locally. Last but not least, all of the actions in the other 7 sections will help improve air quality in Dallas. That said, during our first series of community meetings, we had some stakeholders very clearly tell us, no, you need to come up with something for air quality in and of itself. And so we have 4 actions related to air quality. One of them is adding additional regulatory monitors. The City of Dallas actually does the air quality monitoring for the state in Dallas. And we've got one critical area that has a hole in the network where we are monitoring. So we're working with the state to get that improved. We're also working with the COG on looking at neighborhood level air quality. The other objectives listed are things in other sectors of the plan that help air quality. So you can see everything kind of relates together. With that, James, do you want to talk about implementation planning?
Certainly, we can talk about that. And I don't know if we're running over on time, and probably everyone's eyes or ears are glazing over a little bit at this point. So I'll just do these last few slides really quickly. So we're going to full council on May 27th for the vote. Like I said, it was a unanimous recommendation to move forward yesterday in our Environment Sustainability Committee, which is the first one in the history of our city. It was formed by our mayor with the primary purpose of creating this plan and passing it through. So we're so glad we've been able to hit every major milestone with one little hiccup, obviously, in April when all of our committee meetings were canceled. So the first steps after passage will be developing implementation plans, working on the actions that are already underway, and it's going to be a busy next few years for us. All of the actions have implementation occurring in the first 10 years of the plan. So funding strategies, slide 32. Sue, I think you have control of it, and I can't see where you're at, so I'm going to
I'm on the funding strategy slide. You're good.
Perfect. So we know that budget challenges are going to be tremendous. Everyone on this call probably understands their impacts to our general fund. There's going to be a budget briefing tomorrow at 9 a.m. to our council where they'll discuss and have the first budget workshop. So we know we need a sustainable implementation strategy. We know we're going to leverage external grants, loans, and partnerships. We've already had some exciting announcements. There'll be additional exciting announcements over the next few days about grants and partnerships coming up as well. And really working forward with partners. So hopefully folks on this call that we've talked to before and will continue to talk with, showing that Dallas is a leader, showing that we can accomplish these actions together, hand in hand, not just with community members and advocates, but with the business sector, so that we're minimizing that impact on the general fund and maximizing the collective benefit and the community benefit. Next slide. Here's just a couple of internal and external funding sources. We've been looking at anything and everything. There's even a few actions that contemplate generating revenue, like selling urban forest credits, carbon credits here in the city of Dallas. There's significant interest there in the marketplace, and that could be used so that we're not having to dip into general fund dollars. Next slide. Finally, we know that there's going to be continued interest. We want to be transparent. We want to make sure that this plan remains sort of effective and equitable as with our marching orders. So publicly reporting the status of everything on our website, annually reporting in a comprehensive fashion to our council or through a committee as appropriate, continuing to do an emissions inventory so we know what's working and what's not, looking at trend analyses, so that we can improve performance and continue implementing CCAP in the most effective manner. And finally, some sort of an advisory committee that would continue public input and continue this wonderful collective effort we've had, again, like having everybody around the table and implementing solutions and actions that make sense for Dallas. So that's my 2-minute spiel, Sue.
Okay. So if you have the desire to dive down into the plan and really look at the actions one-on-one, one of our staff members built this website. It's dallasclimateaction.com. It's got all of our presentations. It's got the plan itself. It's got all of our interaction and how we incorporated or didn't incorporate suggestions that we've received from the public. So it is a motherload of information related to both the plan itself and to our process. With that, I think we're good for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sue and James, for this presentation. I'll kick us off with a quick question, and then if you've got other questions from the audience, please put them in the chat feature and we will call on you. I want to ask you all about goal 3, which is alternative transportation, and specifically walking and biking. I think we've all seen one of the results of COVID-19 has been a lot less vehicular traffic, opening up more opportunities for people to walk and bike everywhere. And that's been a positive offshoot of what we've been enduring for the last few weeks. But what are y'all doing to make this a priority going forward when things return to normal? And are y'all working with transportations and Parks and Rec to advance these things?
James, do you want to dive in or do you want me to take a stab at it?
I'll say the answer is yes, and Sue can tell us exactly how we've been collaborating, because it has been truly a collaborative internally at the city and externally as well, particularly with respect to transportation.
Yeah, we've been working both with our transportation department, our planning and urban design department, and actually DART themselves. One of the things that the community told us loud and clear was that they wanted basically a nicer street section, that they would walk that more if they had a place where they could walk. We don't have sidewalks everywhere. We don't have trees everywhere. And there have been requests for even better bus stops. When we talked about micro-mobility in one area, they said, well, don't give us micro-mobility until you make our streets and sidewalks safe for us to use it. And so, and that is one of those equity things. So we have several actions within the plan to make our streets, our street cross-section basically, including the right-of-way, more pedestrian and alternative vehicle-y friendly. We have several items that we're working on with our transportation department relative to future, what we call alternative transit modes. The big thing is to make it easier and more conducive for people to get out of their cars. And you're right, the last month or so, there's a lot more people walking and riding bikes and actually getting themselves around in a little bit more healthful way. I think they do that because there's not as much traffic. And so we are looking at those. We have been working, and it's kind of a group there. Our economic development folks are also involved in these conversations as well, because it does get into how we develop new sites or how we redevelop sites to make them more friendly to pedestrians. One thing that many people may not know is that we also last year updated both the paving and drainage criteria from the 1993 and 98 versions, which really was a new cover on the 1978 versions. And so we've updated our design criteria to be more environmentally friendly, to be a little bit more sustainable. And I think that will help us moving forward as well.
Great, thanks very much. I see we've got a question from Michael Martin. Michael, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure, I was just curious about measures that you see that'll be put in place to help encourage property owners to do more with clean energy.
That's one of those areas where, and we didn't really get into this because we were short on time, but we're working initially with providing education to people. We talked to a lot of people that said, and I've followed up with folks even on Nextdoor that said, I'd love to do solar, I just don't know where to begin. And so obviously we have some opportunities to provide information so people can make those decisions by themselves. We're exploring a couple different partnerships and a couple different grant opportunities that would let us explore renewable energy for lower income homes. They would likely have the biggest benefit because of the percent of their income that is based on energy. So if we were able to reduce that, that would help, I think, in that realm. So we're looking at basically education first, incentives and mandates, incentives second, and mandates last. As James said, we kind of like the carrot and stick approach. We prefer the carrot. But we are looking right now for Department of Energy has a grant on the street. There's a couple other opportunities. But we're trying to find the financing again so that we're not diving into general fund and working on some partnerships to get this tackled. As you know, the North Texas Renewable Energy Group has an annual solar house tour. The city was a sponsor last year. That is a great event relative to providing education and letting people actually see what it looks like and see how well it works for a lot of different types of homes in the Dallas area.
Well, Jeff, can I make one more quick comment?
Sure, please do.
Susan, thank you for that. One thing I would suggest as well, I think forums like this, the North Dallas Chamber, the DRC, all the chambers around town, from a business and a commercial property standpoint, there's our channel for education so that commercial property owners that have a bigger impact than individual homeowners can understand how to get this done. So I would put that idea in the suggestion box.
Okay.
I think that's what chambers are for, is to educate and help businesses know how to do things that bring value to their businesses and to the community.
Great. Thanks, Michael. I see we've got a question from Tony Sezeby, one of our board members from Hewitt-Zollars. Tony, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
You bet. Hi, Susan.
Hey there.
Good to see you again.
Likewise.
So my question is, how are the recommendations of the plan to be implemented by specific projects? Have you identified those projects, and in what time frame, and potentially what's the funding for those?
Yikes, that's all kinds of good questions.
Oh, it is.
I will tell you, we've been so focused on getting the plan to council and finding ways of making sure that we can set up a dashboard so people can follow our progress. We have not fully vetted out the implementation plan yet. In the appendix to the presentation that we did yesterday, we had flagged some of the items that are already started, but we're not there yet on an implementation plan. And I know particularly the folks that are working for engineering and architecture firms have a strong interest in that, understandably, and we will need their help moving forward on getting these implemented. But we're not there yet. James, do you want to add to that?
Sue, I think you covered it.
Thanks very much, Sue and James. We've got a question from Fred Pratt. Fred, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure, Susan. One of the things I learned at the council briefing yesterday is there's going to be a commission formed in a couple of years. Could you elaborate on that just a little bit? Thanks.
So one of the things that just about everybody across the board, from the folks that think we should do away with all natural gas to the folks that think we should do away with our friends at Oncor, the one thing that they all agreed on is that it would be really helpful to have an advisory committee to the city council committee on environment and sustainability to advise specifically on environmental things moving forward, to continue the great work that our stakeholders have provided thus far on the development of the plan. But when we started talking with the city attorneys and with the council members that have been around for a long time, we realized that a formal commission, while having a little bit more teeth, also takes a little bit more time to get in place, because there are vetting processes, et cetera. And so the idea that, we have not set on what that looks like yet, but the idea is to form a committee loosely of the stakeholders who've been working on, with the idea of getting recommendations towards a formal commission moving forward. But we don't want to wait and lose a year in developing a commission. We don't want to hold off on that because we need that first 2 years. And quite frankly, a majority of the actions we've already identified get started in this next 2 years. So we very, very much want to have public input into the plan as we move forward. I think it's going to be really helpful. And not just neighborhoods. Again, I think we need a mix of voices. I think we need the business voice, we need the education voice, we need the public health folks in there. So we need a good comprehensive commission moving forward. But in the interest of time, I think it may be an advisory committee working towards a commission, just because of the process takes time. James, do you want to add in on that? Make sure I wasn't too creative.
No, that's a good, I think your answer was good. And, certainly we see a lot of benefit to everybody being involved going forward. And, the ultimate decision on what that looks like, what that implementation body looks like is not going to be made by us. It'll be made by our committee and the council. So the chairman, Mr. Narvaez, and the mayor. And so certainly, we're not the folks that need to hear about what that needs to look like. And our environmental advocates have not been submitting those directly to us. They've been going to council members with it as well. So if you have strong thoughts on that, you should make them be known.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you all very much. Next question is from Ken Malcolmson. Ken, you're up.
Hey, James and Susan, thank you so much for being here today. And thanks for this very comprehensive report that you delivered yesterday. You should be applauded for not only the comprehensive nature of it, but also for the inclusivity that you had relative to the development of the plan. And so CCAP, we've already read a lot about it and everything else. It's great. However, there are some concerns, and I think you're very well aware of those concerns. We had an energy forum back in January that featured Todd Staples from the Texas Oil and Gas Association talking about the importance of energy independence. And coincidentally, Todd is going to be joining us on Friday for a Redux program to talk about the impact of the pandemic on the oil and gas industry. So how do we balance this whole concept of the need for energy independence in our country that has been a priority for each administration since the Reagan administration with this concept of reducing the sources of energy by being more focused on being environmentally friendly? How do we balance that?
James, do you want to take this one?
Sure. I'll just, from my perspective, I don't think there's anything that calls for reducing sources at all. If anything, we're just trying to look for sources that are going to be competitive on the marketplace, provide great value, and also hopefully be cleaner as well. So, I know all sorts of energy providers have viewpoints on that. I don't know, Atmos was a stakeholder in our last stakeholder committee too. Stood up and says, you know what, we can be part of the solution as well. So coming up with collaborative approaches where we just don't have one particular solution, coming up with approaches, I think you raised energy security, and that brings me back to, the first Iraq war, when we worried about oil imports and what that might do. Just in the last few months, I think the whole idea of the macroeconomics of petroleum has been turned on its head with even prices going negative for short periods of time. So I'm probably not going to be able to give you the exact, precise, on-point answer here, other than to say we need to be flexible. We need to have everyone on board as we move towards better options that provide more security. And I think energy security and resilience is also a developing area. And Michael Martin might be able to speak a little bit more on this too, but the ability to be able to be self-sufficient for some of your energy needs, I think, is appealing to a lot of folks as well, and can provide significant value to a lot of folks as well too. So we want to make sure that if there's interest there and if there's a market there, that we're providing that opportunity for the folks that would want to take advantage of it. Sue, do you have anything to add to that?
No, the one thing that I would say is that we're really lucky. We live in Texas. We're probably one of the largest energy exporters in the country. And our development of all forms of energy exceeds most countries. And so we have a lot of choices. And so the plan overall looks at energy efficiency. So if we can use gas efficiently, awesome. If we can make our grid more resilient, awesome. We are trying to reduce emissions. And so at the end of the day, whatever forms of energy we use, we need to be able to reduce the emissions from both the development and the use of those energy forms. But beyond that, as I said, we're blessed to live in Texas.
Thanks. I think we've got time for one more question. Dr. Maria, you've got the last question. Do you want to unmute and ask it?
Oh, sure. Maria Bocalandro. I am from the Dallas County Community College District, specifically Cedar Valley College. And I have a question. I have two questions. One, as the higher education sector, we participated as stakeholders in the planning process. So what are the next steps? How can we continue to contribute and participate in the implementation? That's the first question. And the second question has to do with, while we're trying to promote alternative transportation, there's huge investments in single lane, privileged kind of travel for passengers, cars, private cars, and just one passenger. So how do we how can we take part of that promotion and funding to alternative ways of transportation?
I'll try. I had a little bit of trouble hearing your second question. On the first question related to your participation in our process, we consider the college district to be an important stakeholder and an important partner as we move forward. And I know that you all are looking at some capital upgrades to your campuses as well. I hope that we will be able to continue to work together on that. And so we have you on our roller as speed dial because I do value the work that you are doing, not only on your own campuses, but in raising the future engineers and architects and people working on these systems. And so the role that you have in green training is also huge. The second question, I think, related to how to implement better transportation options. Is that correct?
Yes, it's the alternative transportation versus the private car with a single driver on a fast lane.
So that is one of those places where I think we start looking at our street sections, and this gets into one of the earlier questions about, while everyone was home officing, et cetera, we've had reduced transportation, and we've had a lot of people walking and biking, and how do we continue that? I think that's where we need to probably work with our public works department and our transportation department so that we can do, in my mind, I would prefer separated lanes. I do a lot of biking. I don't like being a hood ornament. And I think most people that are using alternative forms of transportation are with me on that. And so I think separated lanes, physically separated, not just with little orange cones or paint, because not all drivers respect either. And so that's something where we definitely need to work as part of our bond program, as part of our capital construction works with our friends in these other departments, and possibly friends in your departments as well on campus. So, and we're happy to do so.
Thank you, Susan.
Well, thank you, Susan and James. This has been an excellent presentation. I'm going to turn it back over to Jason Bloom from Haynes and Boone to close us out.
All right, thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Susan and James. As a small token of our appreciation for your presentation, the Chamber is going to make a donation in your honor to the North Texas Food Bank at the close of our fiscal year. Of course, that is needed now more than ever. And thank you to everybody for coming and participating in this leadership briefing and for the great questions. I will now turn it back over to Ken and Jeff for an update on some upcoming events.
No, thank you very much, Jason. Thanks for your sponsorship. And also, we want to thank the Oak Cliff Chamber of Commerce for partnering with us on today's very informative report. Thank you to James and Susan. You're really, really helpful, giving us a perspective that many of us really hadn't had before. And so now we have much food for thought. And as Tony Sotheby said, now we have something to look forward to in the future relative to implementation and execution. And of course, the devil is always in the details. So we'll look forward to supporting that in that process.